Good evening, everyone. I'm Richard French, and we have a winner. I'm just kidding. Bad joke. 2000, still too soon here. We have a long night ahead of us, but it is a very important night for America, and thank you so much for joining us this evening. Well, tonight we've been talking about for the better part of a year, if not longer, election night. Biggest show in America right now. A pivotal election that could reverberate arguably for decades to come, but also an election that was thrown into chaos in our region when, as we all know, Sandy swept through. Well, tonight we are broadcasting all across the Northeast in New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Maryland, Virginia, and Washington, D.C., and we have team coverage from around our region. We will take you live to election headquarters throughout the tri-state area, New Jersey, Long Island, Connecticut, Hudson Valley. We'll also take you to our nation's capital and to the headquarters. We'll take you live to both Chicago and Boston for the president and governor, respectively. And tonight, you at home also are part of our coverage. We open up our phone lines, the only network I believe that's doing that gives you an electorate a voice, not only in this process, what drove you to vote the way you did here, the challenges in post-Sandy that may have posed for you to get out and vote, and also what kind of an American, what kind of a Washington you'd like to see after this night, hopefully, is deciding a victor here one way or the other. 38766-2428 is our toll-free number. And again, we want to know which way you decided to vote and why. Okay, got a lot of ground to cover this evening, obviously, but let's begin in Boston at Romney headquarters. Brandy Hitt, she's standing by with the very latest. Brandy?
This is where Mitt Romney hopes to celebrate a big victory tonight. His campaign knows this race is close, and that's why they're not taking any chances.
I just want to introduce to you, because of your hard work, the next president of the United States, Mitt Romney.
In a last-minute push to rally votes, Mitt Romney added 2 Election Day campaign stops in the key battleground states of Pennsylvania and Ohio.
I'm so optimistic, not just about the results of the election, but optimistic about what's ahead for America.
The Republican challenger cast his ballot in Massachusetts. Running mate Paul Ryan did the same in Wisconsin.
He's got to sweep all the states that touch the Atlantic Ocean, really, to have a chance in this race. And I think Virginia is going to tell us a lot. It's going to tell us if this night ends early for Mitt Romney or if we're in for a long night.
Now, turnout is huge in this election, and the Romney campaign believes he has the enthusiasm and the momentum to get voters, and particularly the independent voters, out to the polls. Reporting live in Boston, Brandy Hitt, ABC News. Now back to you.
All right, Brandy, thank you very much. Now let's go to Chicago, to Obama headquarters, and Karen Travers standing by with that report. Karen?
Good evening. The rallies and campaigning are over, and now it's time for voters to have their say. Here in Chicago, the Obama campaign is openly nostalgic about the president's last election day, but they're also cautiously optimistic the momentum is on their side.
Today, President Obama gave his election prediction, but like any smart politician, he hedged a bit.
We feel confident we've got the votes to win, but it's going to depend ultimately on whether those votes turn out.
During a visit to a campaign office in Chicago, the president congratulated Mitt Romney on a spirited campaign.
I know that his supporters are just as engaged.
The president has the more clear path to 270 electoral votes, and it runs straight through Wisconsin, Iowa, and Ohio. If he sweeps all 3, he wins. After voting in his home state of Delaware today, Vice President Biden made a surprise stop in Cleveland, one last effort to lock down the Buckeye State.
All right, well, thank you.
President Obama took part in an Election Day tradition for him today. He played a game of basketball with some good friends, and his team won by 20 points. And his campaign is taking that as a sign of good luck for tonight. Reporting live from the Obama campaign headquarters in Chicago, Karen Travers, ABC News.
Thank you, Karen. All right, suffice to say, this race, I don't remember one where everybody was so sure it was going to go in opposite directions, and that's just a testament to how tight this thing is, and frankly has been for some time. For whatever it's worth, if you look at composite of the polls, Obama, he's ahead by about a half a point here. And again, I don't really know what that's worth at this point, but I throw that out there. By all estimations, this is extremely tight. Different variations, different maps that all get to that magic number of 270. And this thing has stayed tight for so long that you know, when you look at the numbers here, you get such varying accounts. Either candidate just barely over 270, some in the 300s. We'll get to all that math in a minute. But frankly, for something that we talked about every single night here for the better part of a year, I didn't mention for the entire week last week. And for anyone in this immediate region, and frankly, even in the mid-Atlantic states, you know the rationale why. It all came down to one word: Sandy here. That hurricane not only caused devastation, but put in context some of the political infighting that goes back and forth when you talk about people who didn't know what the next hour, let alone next day, would bring. So the question is, today, a day where we all value our right here to vote. It's a protected right. People have died for it in this country here. But for a lot of people, when it comes to priorities, did they exercise that right? Well, how did it impact the election? For more on that, I want to bring in our panel here tonight here, guys who all know about running campaigns here and seeing firsthand the good and the bad of races. Tom Doherty, Republican strategist, former advisor to Governor George Pataki, and a partner at Mercury. By the way, we'll be talking to the governor later on this evening. Michael Tobin, a political consultant, principal at Hudson TG. We appreciate you got your own candidate with a House race tonight. Brad Gerstman, political consultant, founding partner of Gotham Government Relations, also former player at Hofstra University here, now defunct, sorry about that, and our senior political correspondent, Andrew Whitman. I had to get that in, and Andrew's going to be crunching numbers down all night long. We're even starting to get, or starting to trickle in some of these exit poll numbers that we'll be talking about in a little bit. Okay. You guys also don't just run campaigns, you live in the region, and you know about the realities. And Tom, you know, nobody needs me to re-articulate the devastation we saw. Still the open-ended questions. We've got another storm bearing down on us that's going to hit us between tomorrow and Thursday, a nor'easter albeit. Just talk about the dislocation that's gone on to something as simple as trying to cast a vote. We're going to hear from people later on about, you know, just how hard that was here, but how it really just completely turned everything on its ear a week before the election.
Well, I mean, fortunately, in you know, New York, at least on the presidential side of things, I mean, has very little bearing on what's going to happen nationally. But locally, you know, people, I was talking to somebody yesterday who really firsthand saw the devastation, felt the devastation in the Rockaways. Really, the last thing on their mind is finding a place to vote today. They're trying to find clothing, they're trying to find food, and so that makes a difference politically in, for instance, a state Senate race where, you know, you have a race that is greatly going to be affected by people in Rockaway. So I think that we have to separate the two. One is I think that we have seen really, whether it's Staten Island, the Rockaways, Garrison Beach, et cetera, Manhattan Beach, those neighborhoods, today they really don't care about elections. They care about who's there to help them. There are a lot of cries for help still out there. So there's certainly an effect because people have been displaced on where they're supposed to vote, go vote. But I think that the people who can get to vote, you will find that they will find a way to vote today.
We've got some stories on both sides, exactly what you said. And Michael, I want to bring you in on this because you've got a congressional race right now in Queens. And not only does it affect turnout, but it also affects, I would imagine, the tone of how people campaign in a week before the election and what priorities are that might have been different a week earlier.
Right. Well, first and foremost, you have to be keenly aware and sensitive to the losses that so many of our neighbors are suffering through and still suffering through. In terms of the administration of a city, it impacted whether or not we ran the New York City Marathon, and I think that's going to be something people talk about for a very long time. I think that there was some initial tone-deaf decisions. But disaster response and disaster preparedness are one of the most basic functions of government. So the default setting is incumbents. If you have Governor Christie in New Jersey who spoke at the RNC, so then speaking nice about President Obama, it's going to impact the tone in places like Ohio. Andrew Cuomo could not have come out of this situation better, and I'm probably going to get in a lot of trouble for even putting those words together because he certainly did not politicize any of this. So anybody who he supported in state Senate races is probably going to have a leg up.
Too. And I want to bring in 1 second, Brad, but first I want to go to New York City for a second. A person who can speak to this is Ed Cox, who's chairman of the Republican State Committee right now. And Ed, thank you for a few minutes. I know you got a busy night ahead of you, but just talk about Sandy's impact on a lot of the races. For example, the state Senate in New York right now, a lot of races, obviously turnout's going to be impactful. You've got House races right now, obviously. Staten Island, for example, a race that people can keep an eye on. Talk about how Sandy has complicated things from a political perspective. Obviously, we know how you feel about it from a principled one.
Well, look, it may have complicated from a political perspective, but in the end it didn't, because the reports that we're getting from Breezy Point, from Staten Island, from the Rockaway Peninsula, from Long Beach, from southern Brooklyn, where the areas were hit hard by Sandy, the voter turnout is there. New York Cityites there, we are tough, we're resilient, and they are determined to exercise their right to vote. So I think the impact is going to be, the political impact will be less than people think.
All right. Now, I know you got a lot ahead of you, and I'm not even, as much as you're a born optimist, I'm not even going to go down the U.S. Senate side here, but you got a couple of House races that obviously I know you're going to be watching closely just in our neck of the woods. You got Nan Hayworth's race for one here, and I certainly expect you're going to be keeping an eye not only on Grimm, but give me the races that you really think could go either way in New York tonight that you're going to be keeping a close eye on.
Well, you know, Nan's running a really good race. I think Romney's going to carry Westchester, even though it's 2-1 Democratic, just like Rob Astorino carried in 2009. And that's going to help Nan, of course. And what we have found in the Suffolk County, the 1st District, Randy Altshuler has beaten a double-digit deficit. And now he's running neck and neck with Bishop, and he's got the momentum. And same up in the North Country, where a double-digit deficit back in September has now made a neck-and-neck race. This is the Romney tide rising in those areas which are either purple or slightly red. Romney is having an impact here in those congressional districts in New York.
I love the optimism, Ed. We shall see here. Ed Cox, thank you so much for a couple minutes. And let me bring you back in, Brad, because first of all, he touched on Long Island, and I'll get to the race, obviously, with Bishop and Altshuler in a second. I moderated that debate. But Sandy, and first of all, before even talking about it from a political perspective, Long Island, born, raised, bred, lived there. Literally the landscape and the geography of parts like Long Beach, et cetera, are completely changed. And for people who aren't in maybe this neck of the woods, who try and understand what's still left behind, put in context just how much things are for granted. Forget just power, just basic necessities are still in question.
Yeah, well, Long Beach is a very vibrant town, obviously on the South Shore of Nassau County. It's where so many young people, older people live, as well as just people who have forever lived in Long Beach. People are very proud of living in Long Beach and spent some of their lives, their entire lives there. It's complete devastation. The way of life in Long Beach will take so many years, maybe a decade, to try to resume itself, and it's an awful situation. I think, as far as the politics is concerned, I've seen a shift, obviously, in how people have campaigned, considering and given the circumstances that they are under. The incumbents, I think, down ticket will have a distinct advantage in this race, because they're the ones in these devastated areas going out, handing out the water, handing out the food, face front with the people. And what happened is it just became, not in vogue for for the opponent to come in and just start attacking left and right like we normally would have seen in the last week of a campaign. So I think in places, that have seen the devastation, the incumbent will have a tremendous advantage.
You guys all buy that?
Yeah, I do, because I think that in times of crisis, I think that we generally rally around our elected officials as a source of strength, as a source of leadership. And as I think was already pointed out, I think if you look at Christie, if you look at Cuomo, if you look at Bloomberg by and large, except for the marathon, they've all done very, very well under tough situations. So that filters down to all incumbents.
My only question about that is that there is so little time between the disaster and Election Day. It's still unfolding, the disaster in many places, that normally I think that would absolutely be the case, but you might actually have such an impact on turnout today that the more enthused voters are the ones who actually get to the polls. And you could see, if turnout's way low in some of these districts, challengers with their ardent supporters who are willing to brave anything to get out to the polls actually make an impact. I mean, if there was another week in between the storm and Election Day, I would say, yeah, the incumbents hold all the cards.
Yeah, but the question is where are those races? I mean,
Right.
I think the only race that I really see is the Senate race with Ulrich, is whether or not the Rockaways, the fact that so many of those people can't vote, does that affect that Senate race?
And that those were Ulrich support.
That's where all Ulrich support is. I mean, nowhere in Staten Island is there a race. Grimm's going to win handily. Malliotakis is going to win. Savino's going to win. So nowhere does that factor into the outcome.
Though.
That's far.
There's a
out on the
lesser-known
tip of
assembly
our-
race in Long Beach with Wiesenberg, but he's the incumbent for a gazillion years plus. So he
A
will,
gazillion plus one.
Yes, so he will likely win. And again, he's the guy who's face forward with the people, holding their hands, doing all that. It's very different a campaign when you're in such a devastated scenario. And this is new to us, I suppose.
Now, we talked about how people look at this one way or the other. If you're that displaced electorate, where do you go? I mean, literally, they had to figure out how do they get polling places when the entire places were completely wiped off the map. And in New Jersey, we talked about where people can vote via email right now.
Till Friday.
Till Friday. I mean, so the one question I got, it was funny over the weekend, I don't know about you guys, was not who's going to win, who's going to lose. But are they going to delay the election? I said, it doesn't work that way. You know, you have a constitutional amendment. That's not going to happen. The election's happening. We were on the air for 20 hours a day with this stuff, just the scope of it. And I think people hopefully know in our region that have power. Now, I wanted to try and put a face on this to a degree. Now, for many in our region, it's a much less priority, as we said. And our own Ron Lee, Fios is one, spoke to residents from Long Beach, where we've been talking about, where some say they can't focus on the election right now, and others say they'll do whatever they got to do to vote.
Do you plan to vote today?
No.
Why is that?
Because a lot of things happen.
It may be election day, but registered voters like Gotti Wickstrom have no intention of setting foot in a polling site.
Look around. Terrible. Miserable. Heartbreaking.
Wickstrom lives in Valley Stream, where he has no electricity. This handyman spent his morning here in Long Beach doing repair work. He was helping others who were trying day to day to get their lives back in order following the devastation caused by Hurricane Sandy.
We live by candlelight, and God bless, the Red Cross and the Army. They've been giving out food and water, so that's what we're surviving on.
Long Beach residents like Silberta Tarantino signed up to volunteer at a local polling site. She and other volunteers hope that other people who have been hit by hardship will find the time to vote.
People are so devastated by their losses. We're definitely in a survival mode in this country, so today's election is probably more important than elections in the past.
While it is not clear how many people from Long Beach or other storm-ravaged areas will come out to vote, Governor Cuomo signed an order Monday that will allow voters displaced by Sandy to cast ballots at any polling station in New York State.
We want everyone to vote. Just because you're displaced doesn't mean you should be disenfranchised.
Under the order, voters would sign affidavits saying that they are legally registered. The trade-off, however, is if you do not vote in your local election district, you may be limited to casting ballots only in the presidential and U.S. elections. In Long Beach, Ron Lee, Fios 1 News.
All right, Ron, thank you. Now, we jump to our first break. When we come back, we're going to talk about the states you got to keep an eye on, the clock here tonight, where we're going to start to learn. I'll give you a hint. Virginia's one of them. It's going to tell us a lot here early on. Stay with us. These guys are going to stick around. We're going to bring in some other folks at the table, though. First, stay with us, everybody. We'll be right back right after this quick break.